Hi, I'm Old Norse specialist Dr. Jackson Crawford, and I used to teach Norse mythology at UCLA, UC Berkeley, and then the University of Colorado Boulder before retiring, if you will, from that life to focus full time on my public education ventures. And throughout a lot of that time, I have been hearing about this book by Neil Gaiman, Norse Mythology. Pause for preview photo on YouTube. And I've never looked at it. And a friend of mine loaned me a copy, so I've been sort of slowly dragging myself through it. And these are my remarks on the book after getting somewhere between a third and a half the way through it. Now, I want to admit or make clear that I know that I'm not the target audience for this book. I think that of course, is going to condition what I say about it. This isn't made for me, right? I have no interest in a general interest guidebook about Norse mythology, and I wouldn't teach with one because what I want is for people to appreciate the original sources. That is actually where a lot of my criticism is going to come from of this book, because I think that it will distort people's opinions of the original sources. Now, movies are always going to get more attention than books, but a book by an author with a name people recognize is the kind that gets made into a movie, right? So if there's some kind of Amazon TV series about Norse mythology or whatever, it's going to be based on this. It's not going to be based on a deep reading of the Eddas. In that spirit, more than anything else, it annoys me. Not that I want to be the accuracy police, and not that I think that Neil Gaiman has no merits. My understanding is that he's a very nice man. I actually met him once. It's impossible he would remember this. He was at a sci-fi con of some kind when I was a grad student at the University of Wisconsin 13 years ago or something like that. He seemed very nice. I feel positively towards some of his work. I'm not a big sci-fi or fantasy reader, but I did in fact like American Gods. I thought that he did a really good job of depicting the character of Odin there, Mr. Wednesday. And in fact, I was involved with the American Gods TV show, which I don't think ever was any kind of big success, but I coached Ian McShane on his Old Norse lines as Mr. Wednesday, and I thought Ian McShane did a fantastic job with that. Of course, I'm a Deadwood fan. So nothing personally against Neil Gaiman, not that he's going to see this, although apparently he occasionally does respond to nobodies on the internet, so I guess it's not impossible to respond to this nobody on the internet. I'm not going to count on it. That's not what this is for. Alright, so I suppose another remark that somebody might make, in anticipating that my remarks here are fairly critical, is, well, if you don't like this as an intro to Norse mythology, make your own. I've been doing that for almost 10 years, right? In the form of videos, in the form of my translations into ordinary language of the main sources of Norse mythology, particularly the Poetic Edda, in the form even of things that I've done for other companies, like the Great Courses Norse Mythology class, which you can find on Audible if you want to support my local Dollar General. So, in a sense, I think that I'm a peer here, someone who is trying to speak to the public about Norse mythology, although we come at it from very different directions. Gaiman obviously is an enthusiastic amateur. I don't mean amateur as an insulting word. I just mean he hasn't been professionally paid to teach the stuff. But I'm an enthusiastic amateur when it comes to hummingbirds. And I feel like if I were to make a video on my channel about hummingbirds or publish a book about hummingbirds, well, it's not a great analogy because I'm not, like, a lot more people recognize the name Neil Gaiman than the name Jackson Crawford. But assume that I got to a point where people recognize me from my work in Old Norse or whatever. And then I started making books or videos or something about hummingbirds. the interest is good, but I don't have a professional background in it, so I would want to defer to people with a more professional background. I feel like that often has been done. Maybe deliberately, maybe some people would consider that a good thing. I don't know. But it's really clear to me that Gaiman hasn't read these works in Old Norse. If he has, I will eat a hat. And that is sometimes weirdly old-timey language kind of suggests to me that he has an affection for particular older English translations or particularly older English adaptations. You know, the old-fashioned, like, big book of Norse myth kind of things with bright, glossy illustrations. And that maybe, of course, part of what he's doing is he's carrying on, like, older misinterpretations, older mischaracterizations from those older works and not necessarily freshly introducing them. I don't know. Because, again, I actually don't know that much about popular books about Norse mythology because I'm not the market for them, right? I actually wasn't into this stuff as a kid. I don't have kids. And if the Rube Goldberg level, you know, number of bizarre steps came to the point that I did have kids, I wouldn't read them stuff like this anyway, right? So, not the target audience once more. There's also a couple places where I feel like, you know, Gaiman doesn't quite get the scholarly narrative. On page 12 of this edition that I have, which I think is a pretty common paperback edition, he says, quote, "As best we can tell, the gods of Asgard, that came from Germany." What does that mean? Who's we? That sounds to me like a misunderstanding of the fact that Old Norse is a Germanic language, and that, which doesn't mean from Germany, but that, for example, the pre-Christian gods of England, Germany, the Netherlands, the Goths, etc., were notionally the same as the gods of the Eddas. But to say they come from Germany strikes me as a really weird statement. There's also something that just reads so weird to me is the really inconsistent anglicization. What I mean is, if you're going to have a rule for how you render names in English, just do all names the same or explain why you don't, right? So sometimes he has, like, really anglicized names, Odin, Freya, instead of Odin, Freya. And then sometimes he'll just keep something very close to or damn near the same as the Old Norse original, like Ullr. And then sometimes he has something close to the Old Norse original, but he'll change something unaccountably for some reason. You know, Gjallarhorn with an E in the second syllable instead of an A. Jormungandr with a U in the Gundr instead of Gondr. I don't understand what that's about, right? Does he think it looks better? Is it just a mistake? If it's a mistake, why did he make it if he's looking at all these other sources all the time? So things like that readily creep up on my nerves a little bit. And then that's to say nothing about the storytelling itself. So I'll come back to that after a quick word from my friends and partners at Grimfrost. Sometimes I am baffled at some remark that he makes, like, here's one quote, "My favorite of these is Angrboda, Loki's wife among the giants, who gives birth to his monstrous children and who is there in ghost form after Baldur is slain." What is the ghost form thing? I'm seriously baffled at what he's talking about with that. And then page 45, quote, "One drink from the water of your well, Uncle Mimir," said Odin. Uncle Mimir? It's not his uncle. But part of this is just the way that he really inflates stories, you know, adding details, adding minor characters to them in a way that I think is a little bit more familiar to modern English storytelling, but is really alien to the original sources, right? He has all these speaking parts for beings like Kvasir and Hönir, gods who just don't really get mentioned much, and or even Baldur, who never has a speaking role at all, although he's a significant figure. And to me, you know, again, on the theory that half-popular books become popular movies or TV shows, and that changes how people think about these things. It gives people a vision of a much more populated Norse mythology than we really have in the Eddas, where there's like 4 main gods that you really hear from: Odin, Thor, Freya, and Loki. And other than that, I mean, yeah, minor roles here and there, but those are the ones who are usually talking. He just way over elaborates with internal monologue, which is very rare in Old Norse sources, with expository dialogue with these marginal characters, as I mentioned. I can get into some specific stories, but well, the last one that I read in this book, because I got to page 106, it's his account of Loki's children. All right, so like just working through, let's see, he makes this into a, how many pages? He makes this into a 13-page narrative out of what's probably 1 page equivalent print in Snorri Sturluson's Prose Edda. Adds a bunch of details. He fleshes out the character of Sigyn. Now, look, it's not bad if you are explicitly saying that what you're doing is a retelling, right? If you're not giving it the grandiose title Norse mythology, which makes, because the title is just so plain and simple, it makes people think they're looking at something kind of canon. If you're saying, look, this is, my version, this is, I'm not sure what the hell you would call it, Tales from Asgardr or something. I feel like that kind of elaboration is okay, right? I mean, I don't want to piss on artistic endeavor per se. It's just, again, presented as the canon. It's like, none of these details are there. All we know is that she's his wife. He is sneaking out on her to go to Jotunheimar, where the quote-unquote giants, I'll come back to my problem with this term later probably, live, to dally with Angerboda. And I find this sort of foreign to Loki, the sneaking around about it, right? I mean, this strikes me as 20th century morality, where, the guy's got his mistress that he's keeping secret from his wife. I don't feel like Loki keeps any of these things secret. And it doesn't seem like they have much moral condemnation for him for the sneaking around, because Odin and Thor do all this stuff too. And then we have the children born over in Jotunheimar, strongly implied in Snorri Sturluson's narrative in the Prose Edda that they're born in Asgardr. That's why the gods don't kill them, because the gods have inconsistently a rule that they can't spill blood in Asgardr. So the kids are already there, so they're also not going to bend the rules to take them out and then kill them. They've got to not kill them. And these kids being Hel, Jormungandr, and Fenrir the wolf. So Thor and Tyr in Gaiman's telling, which again, this was unnecessary in the original, have to go to Jotunheimar to get the kids. And, definitely a pet peeve on my part to see Hel described as being half flesh-rotted black, when of course the original Old Norse is flesh-rotted blue, and, or rather blue implying rotten flesh. That is how they describe rotten flesh, with the blue word, and this tells me that he's reading translations by, very conventional and, in my opinion, kind of unimaginative translators of recent bent who just want to translate the word blue as black. They do this because the Norse poets call ravens blue. Ravens are blue. One often lands right here, and I mean, he's not going to do it while I'm sitting here, but you would be able to see. Anyway, wah. But all these details that he kind of adds, the story of Thor and Tyr going to get them. He has this story that's not badly done about Tyr actually kind of getting friendly with Fenrir the wolf, that later bites his hand off. I mean, it makes for a nice little story. No problem with that. He's a writer. Sometimes the new narratives he makes up are all right, but it's not there. And then he flips between this old-fashioned language, with I mean, it's funny that not in this story, but in another story, he has Freya say whom and like one page away from that say, "I hate you so much." You know, this Marvel movie kind of humor. It's just like, I don't know. I feel like you can have someone say whom or Marvel movie humor. I just the two things don't go well together for me. And then sometimes there's this kind of pseudo childlike way of writing that I know I didn't like as a kid, and I don't imagine that many kids like. Like page 41, quote, "They will shape your fate there at Word's Well." Like this sort of repetitious. Page 57, "The large black fly was the biggest, blackest fly you have ever seen." Like, okay, I mean, like I guess it sounds sort of oral storytelling, and it would stand out to me less if it were more consistent, if it weren't just something he floated back and forth into and out of. You know, as far as details from the originals that he misses, I think that portraying the giants as tall annoys me because, like, giant is itself a mistranslation of Jotun, which is the typical word for the enemies of the gods, or Thors. It does not actually imply anything of great size in Old Norse. The so-called giants, I used anti-gods in that Great Courses thing, and I've occasionally used that since as a translation, although I typically just prefer to use the Old Norse term Jotuns. They're not bigger than the gods. They look like the gods. You know, they're not blue like in Marvel. Many of the gods are former Jotuns who get promoted to being gods by marriage. You know, Thor and Odin both, their moms are counted among the Jotnar. It's just that they're not actually huge. The need for them to be giants is a figment of English translation and translation to some other languages. I think the reason they were ever translated as giants at all is because of influence from classical mythology, where the gods are opposed by the Titans. But in the story of the master builder who makes the wall around Osgardr, you know, we have them not realizing that the guy is a quote-unquote giant until he finally, at the end of the story, reveals it. You know, he grows 18 times taller or whatever. It's like, this isn't why they don't realize that he's a Jotun. They don't realize he's a Jotun in the original because there's no physical distinction between them. Now, it's supposed to be early in the history of Osgardr and the realms, so why don't they just kind of know everybody? I don't know. But it's not as if myth is logical. But even within that framework, it's not as if there's even room, I think, for picturing the Jotnar as bigger than the gods. Not the way they interact, as just members of one family. I could go on and on and on about, you know, the way that he has all these extra details, which, you know, I don't always really like. Just, you know, again, something that bothers me is all the lines put in the mouth of, like, Baldur, Crosshair Hunting, or these unspeaking characters. But let me mention, there's a couple places where, you know, I think his innovations are neat. Again, if they're not being presented as sort of canon, and even if he doesn't intend to present it that way, people are going to read it that way because the title is Norse Mythology, although that might be, you know, the fault of his publisher more than of him. You know, when he's talking about Odin and his brothers creating the cosmos, I thought this was a good paragraph. Quote, "Odin and Vili and Ve, the three sons of Bor, grew into manhood. They saw as they grew, far off, the flames of Muspel and the darkness of Niflheim, but they knew that each place would be death to them. The brothers were trapped forever in Ginnungagap, the vast gap between the fire and the mist. They might as well have been nowhere." I mean, that's interesting, right? It situates characters in a place in a way that the originals really don't. Like, I appreciate that the elaboration there makes a more tangible story to a modern audience. Sure, I mean, like, that's where Gaiman is at his best. There's another one that I thought was notable in the section I've read so far, page 88. Quote, this is from after Loki as a mare has given birth to Sleipnir, Odin's horse. Quote, "It was a beautiful foal, although it had 8 legs instead of the usual 4, and it followed Loki wherever he went and nuzzled him, and treated Loki as if he were its mother," which of course was the case. The foal grew into a horse called Sleipnir, a huge gray stallion, the fastest and the strongest horse that ever there had been or ever there would be, a horse that could outrun the wind. And before that, quote, Loki stayed away for the best part of a year, and when he showed up again, he was accompanied by a gray foal. Like, again, making a tangible scene of Loki coming back as the mother of this horse, and like I kind of appreciate like the mild humor and the tangibility in that. Like these are places where Gaiman's work is well adapted, and I think well adapted for the kind of like flashbacks to mythical scenes that you see in American Gods. I just think, again, my biggest issue with this book is the way that people are going to read these over-elaborated stories with their marvelly humor sometimes as being the canon versions of stories that are not, in their original versions, in my opinion, any less readable or less interesting. Well, I might keep reading this book. I've at different times over the years started reading some book or series or watching something and making my comments about it, and you know, usually people aren't real interested in that, so I usually haven't finished these things. If there's more interest in me finishing this book, I'll take that upon myself and read the next half or 2/3 of it that I haven't yet. So let me know on Patreon if you'd like to see more of this kind of thing. And for now, thank you to Patreon and to people who support the channel on Ko-Fi too. Thank you to the people supporting me by taking my Old Norse classes or buying my books, original translations of the original stories of the Norse gods and heroes. And for now, from beautiful Colorado, I'm wishing you all the best.